Case 052 through the cycle. It was one of the first formalized music concepts I learned in music school, and it was playing through the cycle. And I had a sheet given to me by my improv professor that had a graphic of the cycle. And on the top, it was labeled jazz cycle. But you don't have to use the cycle for jazz. But I have noticed that jazz musicians followed the cycle rather than the circle. But to begin, I'll give a little discourse on the circle, and then we'll get to the cycle. This all sounds very cryptic right now, talking about circles and cycles. The circle is the circle of fifths. You've probably heard of that, or maybe you haven't, but it's all over. You can find it on the internet. And the circle of fifths were a concept that I did have familiarity with before I got to music school. There was a man in my neighborhood, Nathan, who I worked with at the local arcade, back when they had arcades. And he was a trained musician. And he knew I was a rock musician, and he said I needed to learn some theory and other concepts to improve myself as a player. And he gave me a theory text, the one that he had used at North Texas. And it had a page or a couple pages, like all theory texts do, the graphic of the circle of fifths. And it's a circle. And at the top is the C, the key of C, no sharps or flats. And you move to the right, clockwise, and you're moving in perfect fifths. And this is really easy for electric bass players. So you take the C and you move your finger to the next string and 2 frets over, and you're at G, and you keep doing that. And then you go to D and A and E, and we're going in sharps, so G 1 sharp, D 2 sharps. They're following the sequence of sharps or flats, and that, if you get to that end of it, and E, and so on and so forth. And as you make your way to the bottom of the circle, you're moving to the flat keys. So you get to C flat, G flat, D flat, and you're moving up the clock, right? All the way to F. And then you're back at the top to the key of C. It's the first thing that I teach my Theory 1 students the first day of class. I make them write it out. And it's to help structure the keys in your mind in a way that you can count up or down. Or as I did as a music student, I had the electric bass fingerboard in my head, and I could figure it out from there. And it's also useful for structuring your practicing, because you need to play things in all keys. So if you were working out your major scales, you'd work them through the circle or the cycle. You start on C, play major scale in C, and then you go to G and D and so on and so forth. And it makes sure that you grab all the scales, or if you're working on licks, or if you're a keys player and you're working on voicings, and you see where your weaknesses are. Some people play certain keys better than other keys, like D flat. That's really difficult for bass players. We struggle with that. A flat. But it makes you get there. But that's the circle of fifths. And many classically trained musicians use those for structuring their practicing. I've had a lot of double bass players that took lessons with other classically trained double bass players, and when they worked on their technicals, when I say technicals, I mean scales, arpeggios, double stops, etc. They went through the circle of fifths. But I want to give some discourse on the cycle, which is the title of it, Through the Cycle. And that's what I deal with more, especially as a bass player and especially as a jazz musician. With the cycle, I'm going the other way. You just, if you're looking this up, you're looking up circle of fifths on the internet, and you see that graphic, and there's a million of them out there. Instead of going clockwise, I'm going counterclockwise. I'm going to the left. So I start on C, and then I go to F, 1 flat. Then B flat, 2 flats, then E flat, 3 flats, A flat, 4 flats, and you go to the bottom, and so on and so forth. And you start making your way through the sharp keys. You get to the bottom of the circle, and you're at C sharp, and you're still going to the counterclockwise: C sharp, F sharp, B, E, A, D, G, and you're back at C. And this comports better with bass players, because our instruments, unlike most players like cellists, violinists, and violists, we're tuned in fourths. like the cycle of fourths, which is what this is. But in a larger sense, many, many, many chord changes move through fourths. Let's just take like a 2-5-1 progression. You know, you listen to one of my previous episodes, and it's just C minor to F7 to B flat major. I could play the C on the A string and then move my finger to the D string, and that F is going to be right there, and then move it to the G string, and that B flat's going to be right there, and I'm just moving in fourths. So practicing our technicals in fourths is good for our ears because we're hearing that sound of the interval of the fourth moving. And we're reinforcing that sound every time we work our scales. For instance, through the fourths. You know, think about an F blues. Check out one of my other episodes where I talked about F blues. Starts with F7, and the next measure is B flat 7, up a fourth, right? When my students are playing scales in my studio, it's instantly noticeable when they land on the wrong note to start the next scale if we're moving through the cycle. I mean, it's just so the repetition and reinforcement of fourths is totally into my system. You know, I'm completely dialed into fourths. You know, like I mentioned, that second bar of a blues, I can tell sometimes, and it's completely right. Sometimes I'll hear a player and he or she will be playing an F blues and they won't go to that B flat 7 in the second bar. And I can instantly hear that because my ear is so in tune to hearing that. It's good ear training to be able to hear where a chord is moving and to knowing you have to move to it. You want to hear where it's going and being able to identify it rather than have some keys player yell the chord change at you, or some guitarist making an exaggerated gesture moving to the fourth while staring you down. That's the beginning of your ear training, is in fourths and practicing your technicals, your scales, and whatnot. All the other intervals are important too, but the fourth is the place to start. So I'm kind of getting away from that, but that's why the cycle is important, you know, and it helps us identify what in music terminology we call a perfect fourth. Playing your scales and arpeggios through that cycle, playing licks through the cycle, playing melodies through the cycle. As a music student in music school, playing your class piano scales through the cycle, you won't miss anything. So think about that. I'm going to put up a couple of videos of me playing through scales through the cycle. And if you have any questions, email me at phil@basscase.co. I'll talk to you soon.